Alright, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cheyenne, I work at the library, and this is my Teen Writers Club lesson, specifically requested by one of the writers here. Hi! So, as a result, I'm first going to define this though, because I know not everyone knows what adding meat to your story means. So, adding meat to your story is basically when you take it from the bare bones of you have a basic character who wants to do X. You have a plot that is going to go in this general direction and have this general goal. And you have general scenes that have a semi-purpose to being able to fully flesh it out into a world without just adding more bare bones to your bare bones. Making sure that you fully feel that the story is real and immersive in a way that is not overwhelming or overpowering. So that's the difference between meat and just a story feeling bloated and fat. We don't want our stories to be fat, we want them to be well built. You know, good muscles good, and some curves also fabulous, but we don't want problems. There's beauty in every body shape, but we do not want unhealthy. And that is the same thing with our story. There's beauty in every story, but we do not want an unhealthy level of detail. We also, though, don't want you to be so skinny you fall apart. All right, so with this, sorry, for those on the recording, I have a lesson plan right over here. The first part with adding lots of meat that I could think of when I was putting this lesson together is showing, not telling, which I know this is something that I feel like I'm beating a dead horse probably for some of you, because show don't tell is like the number one thing that people mention over and over and over to the point where you probably just want to never hear the words show or tell again. But it's important. And ultimately, it does help add meat to your story because it takes it from that basic bare bones, ultimately, to that elaborate world building. For instance, and even then it adds more words. For instance, I wrote a paragraph this morning while I was planning out the lesson. I planned out the lesson and then wrote these paragraphs. Point being. The telling paragraph ended up being 56 words, and the showing paragraph ended up being 94 words. That's almost double. And why is that? Because you're demonstrating things without directly saying them, which sounds counterintuitive sometimes when you're starting out, because you're like, oh, but they need to know this particular fact. If they need to know it, you can show it without beating them over the head with it. Make sure that you're not spoon-feeding your reader. You are just showing them. It's like a play. You show them there are two actors on a stage. You don't say, there are two actors on a stage. They can see that. Moving right along, here's the telling paragraph that I had in basic. When they arrived at the banquet, they ate fried chicken and potato wedges. Easton boasted about their fight. Krista was blonde, with bright green eyes and freckles. She said she didn't like potatoes and only poked at them before finishing her chicken and going upstairs to sleep. She was super tired from using magic earlier. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that is only acceptable if you are below the age of 9. Then it's perfectly acceptable. If you want to write children's books where the main audience is either small children or kids 9 and below, absolutely, 100%, this would actually probably be perfect for that age range. But that's the problem. Most of us are not writing for 9-year-olds. Most of us want to write a novel, a novella, something in the middle grade to YA to adult category. I would say middle grade to YA purely because you're teens. So you probably won't be getting into the dark magic kind of stuff until later. You know, kind of that dark Brandon Sanderson stuff where you're like, okay, enough stabbing, stop stabbing. Please, enough stabbing. Yes, I have to agree. The one thing I hated about this one was I was like, man, could we stop stabbing people? just a little bit. So, keeping that in mind, here's the same paragraph, but I tried to do a little bit of showing. Pardon me if it is rough, because as I said before, I planned out this lesson, and then I wrote these this morning, because I realized an example might be helpful. Krista's sweaty blonde bangs fell like ragged ribbons in her eyes. Her muscles ached. I totally kicked your butt, Easton grinned. Did not. I just got worn out. Krista plopped down in her seat, poking at her potatoes with a scrunched expression of displeasure. Well, maybe if you practice your arcanum more, you wouldn't be so tired, Easton chuckled. Shut up. She nibbled on her chicken until she reached the bones and stood, legs shaking as she stumbled up the stairs, flopped into her bed, curled up, her eyes falling closed to sleep. This is a great example of taking the prior paragraph, bare bones of a scene, the minimum, absolute, pure words on a page, and taking it to another level. It is a broader, brighter, more fully fleshed out scene. You see that they call magic arcanum. You see that that Easton and her relationship is kind of tenuous, and you're not sure if he's just teasing or if he's kind of a jerk, but that's something you can discover with time. You don't need to say that it is XYZ. They will figure it out with time. You need to make sure that you are not forcing your readers to see it your way. You are helping them, guiding them, not shoving them. Readers don't like to be shoved. They like to be guided along a beautiful fantasy path. All right, moving on to the next point in the lesson. Not rushing the plot. You need to make sure that every scene has its due. And you need to make sure that the plot has ups and downs. Now, I'm going to try to draw this in a way that can be seen here. So, with your basic plot, most of you have probably seen this, where, you have your little exposition, and you have the little mountain thing, woohoo, yay, storytelling in English classes. Oh my gosh, this marker is not working at all. I'm going to try green. Okay, there we go, that works a lot better. So you've probably seen this in a lot of your English classes, the classic 3-act structure kind of thing. The problem is, this is bare bones plotting. Real plotting does not look like this. Real plotting, ultimately, you don't necessarily have to do this with your plotting, but your plot should look like this when you're finished. Looks a little bit more like this. You have your beginning, and then you have beep, 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 beep. Why? Because it's important to have highs and lows, try and fail, successes and ultimate disappointment. Why? Because if your character is successful all the time, your readers won't relate. They'll just think it's super weird. And your highs and lows do have to be proportionate. We'll talk about this more in the try-fail cycle thing, which is right after this. But to focus on the plot, make sure that if you have a complicated villain, if you have a complicated hero, you need to make sure that that complicated hero and that complicated villain have an equally complex plot to match. If you have a super simple plot of the villain steals the damsel in distress and the hero goes and saves her, yay! What a cliche! Not only is that a cliche, but on top of that, if you have this deep, dark, complex villain and this, complex hero who has PTSD or, depression, and they're fighting all these inner demons, that is an awesome story right there. I want to read that. Or a hero or a villain who is struggling with, am I doing morally the right thing? That's awesome. But if you then have the plot go, oh, well, this hero with depression decides to go and save his girlfriend that was kidnapped by the villain and succeeds immediately, happily ever after.
What?
Exactly, what? What is happening? I'm so confused.
I'm sorry, I think you have us confused for a 2-year-old.
Exactly, I'm you don't need to simplify it, and you don't need to rush it either. If you're planning a heist, don't immediately be oh yeah, there's a heist. Poof! Done. Or if you've been leading up to this scene the whole time, like with Harry Potter, for instance, they're the Goblet of Fire, right? They have all of this lead up, and they're yes, the epic Goblet of Fire. They don't go, oh, by the way, the trial is finished in 2 chapters. No! Why? It takes a lot longer. You want it to be you want your suspense to be thoroughly proportionate to the actual action scene. If you have all of this build up for a heist, and then the heist is finished in 1 chapter, super simply, no complications.
Bert, how did that happen?
How did that happen? Nothing ever goes as planned, A. B, your plot has just gone from this beautiful, with mountains and ridges and valleys, to being
Yeah.
This is sad. Don't do this.
It's very, almost as depressed as my character.
When you're doing story writing, you want it to be a roller coaster. You want to start out with a little bit of suspense there at the bottom. You want to give them a little wee, and then you want to give them another little wee, and then you're like, oh, 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 wee! You want to take them on a roller coaster ride. You don't want to be the little kiddie coaster that goes about 5 feet off the ground and you go, yay, and you're done.
The one that you cried at.
To be fair though, when it comes to roller coasters, that's why I say the roller coaster is the same proportion to plotting. Because with little kids who are 9 and younger, generally, you want to have a simplified plot because of the fact that that is what they can handle. And just like kiddie coasters, that is what little kids can handle. But if you're writing middle grade to YA, then you need to make sure that you do this. All right, moving right along. So this moves right directly into try-fail cycles. Now, you need to make sure that you are not rushing this. Just because a lot of you might really want to get to the action, right? You're like, the second they figure out their powers, it's going to be awesome. That's great, but you got to take your time. You got to make sure that as you're learning their powers, you're like, if their powers have them all the way up here, doing epic, awesome stuff, and you have them starting out here with no powers, you can't just go, pew, express train to the top. Then your readers are just sad.
Yeah, no. It has to have. It has to have more. Like it has to have more arcs.
Exactly. Not only does it have to have more arcs, but on top of that, no one learns that way. Last time I checked, I did not automatically succeed at chemistry when I walked into the classroom. Otherwise, why am I there? If I already know everything about chemistry, why am I trying to learn?
So just like everyone, I'm like, oh, I know everything about that chemical.
Exactly. I know its exact pH. I know its exact molecule number. I totally forgot most of chemistry, as you can tell. But that's the point. It needs to be a try and a fail. It needs to be up and down. And so when you have point A to point B, you need to make sure that it's proportionate. If their high is super high, you need to make sure the low is proportionately low. How low can you take them with failure before they're able to go back up? And that's actually really important because the lower they go, the better and sweeter the success will feel. For instance, if you have a character who has never used magic before, we're just going to continue with the magic example, and then all of a sudden they're like, poof, I waved a wand and now I know everything about magic. Your readers are going to be very frustrated. And
it's like, is this a book or is this just, oh yeah, I'm going to tell this story very, 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 very
as quickly as possible. I'm just trying to get it out of the way.
Something happened here.
Oh yeah, by the way, your magic, moving on.
They got magic and then they defeated this one guy.
It's important to make sure you have equivalent. And even if you just have a little equivalent, but the problem is if you have little failures, then you have to have more of them. You either have to have several, like 2 or 3 big failures, or you have to have many failures, little ones. For instance, if they're learning magic and they maybe like Harry Potter, they succeed in, doing this fancy little accidental spell, like puts Dudley in with the snake, right? And that's great. But then of course he has failures where he goes to the wand shop and tries to pick a wand and it freaking blows up. You need to have these little failures, or even when he's trying to learn Wingardium Leviosa, right? She's like, it's Leviosa. And he's like, Hermione, why? The reason that works so well is because you see him failing at the spell. And even with Hermione, she may not be failing at magic, but she's failing at something else, right? And that makes her relatable. She's failing at being social, right? You have to have your characters fail at something. And you don't necessarily have to have them be a failure in what they're doing. But at the same time, if they've never learned it before, it is important to have try-fail cycles. Otherwise, you are doing what is called a Mary Sue or a Marty Stu character.
Oh, what?
And basically, it's a term for your character is overpowered and lame.
Exactly.
Your character needs to have more failure.
Every single role-playing character Michael tries to create.
So as a result of that, you need to make sure there's this try and fail. And you need to make sure there's lots of them on the way to the top. And when I say lots of them, I don't mean 2. I don't mean, oh, she tries to snap her fingers and it fails. And then she tries to wave a wand and it fails. And she tries to wave her wand again and it fails. And then, poof, she does the spell perfectly.
No.
3 times isn't enough.
No, my brain. What just happened?
Exactly.
My brain just broke.
Right. I last time I checked, none of us do everything perfectly after 3 tiny tries in less than an hour.
Nope.
Yeah, no, on my comments, I just have a lot of indent.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's see.
That's like 55.
All right, this is a caveat that I wanted to mention with the try-fail cycles that is in my notes, because it's important to mention. Like with Hermione, even if they're already very skilled at something else, like Hermione, she has studied her butt off to get this magic, right? She is like, I am dedicated. I know what I'm doing. But she probably failed
later,
before then,
suckers.
right? She probably failed a lot before then when she was practicing, but we didn't see that. But we still need to see characters fail in other ways, like with her, with social. Being social is hard for her. Making friends is clearly difficult. She doesn't know how to people. And that makes her relatable because she's failing at something else. So even if your character is perfectly capable, let's say they're a police officer, you can have them be a very competent detective. They don't have to fail at being a detective, but they might fail at, asking out a girl on a date. And they might be perpetually single because they can't figure it out. Or they might be, that's fair, or they might be struggling in another way, like they have a really rough relationship with their parents and they can't seem to fix it or something like that. You need to have them fail in other aspects if you're going to have them be successful solely at what they're supposed to be doing for the story. Otherwise, they're not relatable. And even then, I would say have them fail every once in a while. Like in most cop shows, even if they succeed most of the time, there's every once in a while where they're like, we totally missed that, and now the killer's getting away. Crap.
It's like,
You
he's
took
at my
the
house.
words right out of my mouth.
And then he's on my house. Oh crap, he's not on fire.
Or even
Right
just
up.
misidentifying. We think it's so-and-so because of evidence, and then it's like, JK, they were framed. It's so-and-so, and you're like, shoot.
Oh.
And then it's like, just kidding. They were framed, like someone framed both of them.
Exactly. So it's like you can have them still fail even if they're successful at something. I am a professional editor as well as a writer, and I have had lots of times where I've had my stories published. I have 3 published short stories. However, I've also had lots of times where I have had my short stories get rejected, even recently. And that's not because I'm a bad writer. It's just because some is better and some is worse. And that's the same thing with anyone else's writing, the same thing with anything else that happens.
I remember my first stories. It was like so much shit.
Exactly. Some of your stories, you're just like, oh, that's rough. But that's okay, because that's part of the learning process.
For Mount Film, for like,
Mhm.
I need to go to the junior high or Macon,
Mhm.
because I won't have my Mountain View account anymore, and all of those sucky stories are bye-bye.
And with that, also, even as an editor, there are times where I will consult other editors because I will read a paragraph and I will say, this paragraph is off, but I can't quite figure out what. So I'll consult another editor and they'll say, I think it's because the romance is too fast or something like that. And then they'll mention, so the romance is too fast, but the reason it's too fast is this. And I'm like, oh, totally, absolute, obvious. I don't have a lot of that happen, but it still happens. Just like with cops. In cop shows, 99% of the time, they catch the bad guy the first time, right? But then there's that other 1% of the time where it's like, oh shoot, we really messed up.
Like, oh shoot, they're gonna just like, oh shoot, we let them out of jail accidentally, thinking that they were another person.
Exactly.
You know?
Things happen, mistakes happen, and even
That's
just
the dog.
failures happen, or even just struggles with things. And with that comes our next point. Like I mentioned before, building relationships is important to add meat to your stories. Why? Because relationships are vital to your story unless you're purposely writing about someone in an abandoned spaceship or something and they're the only person. But even then, it's typically good to have like an AI or something. Because having a character by themselves is doable.
Depressing.
But it's depressing and it's hard to write. It's very hard to write. Because you have nothing to bounce off of.
3 cats in my story.
Wait, exactly. You have to have multiples.
Like
At least
guy-
2.
Guy stranded on an island, romance novel.
Oh gosh, romance novel with what? A coconut?
Oh, heck yeah.
All right.
What the-
It's like that one Studio C, you know?
Oh,
Where
gosh.
it's like, it's like practicing to go to, like now practicing to go to Natalie's house, right?
Oh
Right?
gosh.
With like the puppet.
All right. So.
And we're done.
with building relationships, you need to make sure that you're building your relationships appropriately. If they are a sister who has been long lost and they don't really know them, that's okay. You can build up that relationship later when they actually meet said sister. But ultimately, if the sister's in the whole thing, or the girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, you need to make sure that they have a proportionate relationship. You want to make sure that if they are their best friend, we feel like they are our best friend too. You know, it makes it feel like when that character, for example, if you want to kill off a character, you need to make sure that that character is really, really lovable. So lovable that when they die, you are devastated. Or rather, the reader's devastated, because sometimes you might be seeing it come in and be evil as a writer. But
Like in the 12
you need to
book
make sure
version,
that the reader is absolutely devastated. As an editor, I recently was editing a manuscript professionally, and this particular person had me bawl my eyes out. Go check it out. If you're into dystopia and YA,
Ooh.
it's called When Death is Coming. It's going to be coming out in June, and it's by Jen Woodrum. Oh my gosh. She made me bawl my eyes out. Like, literally, I was sitting there just going, like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. That I kept reading and editing and reading, and as I'm editing, I'm just like, I can't hold this together anymore. Because I loved this character. She had built the relationship up so much, and it doesn't have to be big things. You don't have to have it be like, as so-and-so held me while I had a panic attack, and we sobbed together. Like, you can do that. But don't have that be the only thing that makes their relationship worthwhile. And don't have it be just like they go on 4 or 5 shopping trips together. Either, if you're doing 2 girls together. I see that a lot. Where they're like, we're best friends, but all we do is shop together. And I'm like, okay, 1 or 2 shopping trips together, sure, I totally get that. I've done that before. But every week, man, no one has that kind of money. Like,
Except the government.
except the government or a millionaire. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna take off characters. I must say, cough, cough, freaking Mistborn.
Fair. But anyway, point being, killing off characters, and I'm not spoiling anything for Jen Woodrum's novel, because it's literally called When Death is Coming. So, like, it's obvious someone's going to die in the end by the title, so I promise, no spoilers, just know that you won't. And if you don't, you are heartless. I am sorry what happened to you. Anyway, point being,
Well, you see.
you need to build up these relationships proportionate to their death. If their death has no meaning and they are just the guy in the horror movie who no one knows except their name is Chad, and then all of a sudden they randomly die, and their whole point was basically just to introduce the murderer because they died, you don't have to build up that relationship. No words. But if their death means something, if they are sacrificing themselves for a character, or if they are the main love interest, or if they are the best friend in the universe and this person's only friend, you gotta make sure it matters. You gotta make sure that when they die, I'm not like, oh, okay.
He died.
Exactly.
Those things are
He
in
died.
Friends book 12, and I'm like,
It needs to matter. It needs to be important.
You know, you're just like, oh, screw you. Nobody liked you anyway.
Exactly. You don't want your reader to be like that either. You don't want your reader to be like, no one liked that character anyway. I'm glad they're dead. Like, unless that's your purpose. Unless the whole point of the character is you're glad they're dead, then sure. But that's generally not what we're going for.
the person had amnesia, and it turned out that they like were actually like dating or something. So they needed to find
That
a way to
happens quite
sacrifice
frequently.
themselves.
That's very much a
I
trope.
think
Two.
the movie. What's like the movie where the guy gets like lost on an island and he becomes friends with like the
Oh, shoot. I know what you're talking about, but the friends with the volleyball.
Yes.
Wilson. Oh my gosh, it's so funny because I've never actually seen it, but everyone I know tells me that people cry when he loses Wilson, and yet he's a volleyball. Wilson is a volleyball. Man, I need to actually watch that movie because it is like a cultural reference at this point. But yes, absolutely, that is a perfect example of building relationships. He has built a relationship with a volleyball, and he has built that relationship so freaking much that you're like, oh my gosh, the volleyball! You need to make sure that we care about...
Stinky.
You need to make sure that we care about your characters as much as he makes you care about that volleyball or more. So you need to make sure that it's proportionate to their meaning in the story, and if they have a death in the story, that it needs to matter. And you also need to make sure that when they do things together, show them. Don't just say, oh yeah, by the way, I go shopping with her every week, or yeah, oh yeah, we went shopping. You need to show them going shopping and the little inside jokes that they do, or, oh hey, that boy's cute, or, you need to show them building this relationship. Or if you're having them fighting in the middle of battle and they're developing this combat-based relationship, you need to make sure that they are, punching the bad guys in the face and the other person's punching the bad guys and they're like, bro, you're amazing. Can you punch this guy for me if I punch your guy? And you're like, yes. That builds a relationship during battle. But if you just say, and they fought bravely.
That's very, very
I'm bored.
That's nice for you, but I'm bored. Give me some meat, please.
And on top of that, make sure that when you give meat, you don't skimp on the meat. Like I said, you can be too skinny too. In your stories, you need to make sure that you aren't like, oh yeah, and they fought, and they were like, I love you too, bro, I love you too, and then that's it.
And then they die.
Yeah,
The fighting scene needs to matter. And you can make a character matter even if it doesn't make you cry, even in a couple scenes. Earlier, I was watching a show. I'm not going to say which show because, unfortunately, it's a particularly violent show. But so I wouldn't recommend it. But it basically they're fighting off all these mythical creatures, and they're all about to die, right? And this character, you've never seen him before until basically this episode of the TV series. And this character, all he wants to do is sit down, have a drink, eat some food. That's all he wants. And the whole time he's having to fight off all these mythical creatures, he's like, as soon as I kill all these things, I'm gonna freaking sit down and take a break. And you're like, man, I feel that. I need a break too. And it makes you just resonate with him. And then of course he dies, and you're like, man, he never got to take a break. You feel for him. Even if you're not crying, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel that on a spiritual level. I need a break too.
And
Sometimes
close
you
the book
need a
and
break.
you forget to put your bookmark in.
Oh,
That's
that
the
sucks.
worst thing that could ever happen.
Exactly. You just have moments where you're just like, man, life kind of sucks.
That's why you use a bookmark and you memorize the pages.
And the pavement.
Just take
It's
all
true.
the precautions.
It's true. All the precautions. Yeah.
What time I go walk Belle out?
Because it matters. It matters to you, right? And even the small things can matter. This was a small thing. All he wanted to do was have dinner, have a nice drink, and take a break. Small thing. But it makes you relate to him, right? It builds that relationship where you're like, bro, felt that in my soul. All right. My next point is going to be avoiding cliches, as we mentioned before. Now, here's the caveat I will give with cliches. Tropes and cliches are there for a reason. They can be utilized good. The reason that, they can be utilized for good, or and it can be used for the betterment of your story. However, big italicized, bolded, underlined, however. Most people use them as a scapegoat. That is the problem. You cannot use it as a scapegoat. It has to be something that you make unique. For example, if she falls in love with the prince and, classic damsel in distress, why? Make it matter. Make it unique. Make it your own. Maybe they fight battles together rather than being a damsel in distress. Maybe she's a damsel in distress because she lost her magic powers and he's trying to help her get her powers back. So she's a damsel in distress now, but later she's going to kick some butt. That helps make it unique. That helps make it your own. Whereas if you just had her be, oh, I'm a damsel in distress. Oh, you can save me. Mwah.
No.
No.
Heck no.
Stop. No.
Shut up. Don't you
Scribble it all out. No.
Don't do any stuff like that. The only ghost in fairy tales.
And on top of that, there are modern day tropes too, and you need to make sure you're careful of those too. For example, I had one written down, so I'm gonna check this one. Fake dating. This is a big romance trope, especially nowadays, right? You can't just have them fake dating for no reason. You can't just be like, oh, they want a fake date because they want a fake date.
Oh yeah, like in
Because
Chuck,
I need
right?
them to. It's like, what? No. You have to actually fake date for a reason. Like, you have to fake date because it's your cover and you're secretly a spy. And if you
Yeah.
don't need, yeah, exactly.
like in Chuck.
Yes, I love that show. I wasn't sure if it was the right show though, so I was like, I'm gonna wait. But yes, yes, there is a show called Chuck, and I would highly recommend it. It's hilarious.
You know, we
Nine out of 10.
But
we never quite like finished the series because
Oh,
we
yeah.
watched one episode
that's
and then
frustrating.
we were just like, you know what, we're not gonna watch that.
That's sad.
No, I'm like, okay, but it wasn't like we're not gonna
But
watch
anyway.
that. We watched it and we just completely forgot about it for
That's fair.
like
That
a year.
happens. That happens.
That's what
Anyway,
happened.
The
Get it right.
point is, with that show, with Chuck, the reason that it's interesting is because they're fake dating. Yes, classic trope, cliche. But he is an intellectual resource to the CIA, and she's a CIA agent. So in reality, she's more of his bodyguard, but they have to fake date because no one else knows that.
Except for that one guy.
Except for that one guy. But anyway, point being that this makes it so that it feels more real. Or like fake dating in the regard that you're like, oh my gosh, my ex wants to get back together with me and I really don't want to. Will you please just fake date me so I can avoid him? Like, that is also a trope that I've seen done, but it works because it is a reason. It's a reason that makes you like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Granted, if you do that particular trope, make sure that you have a reason for avoiding the ex. Don't just be like, because they're my
Because
ex.
they're- just
Be
like,
because they're
because
abusive,
you're a
they're
mass
manipulative,
murderer.
or they need to have a reason they're your ex. They can't just be like the perfect guy and for some reason they're your ex, unless you plan on having them get back together later. In which case, why do you have the fake dating trope? That's another story.
Like, no,
but
like there's just this like really nice guy, but say like they're a mass murderer.
yeah, and see, there you go. That's a big problem. Big red
Of
flag.
course, your mind went there.
To be
I
fair.
am tying you to a chair and making you watch PBS Kids.
All right. But then there are other types of things, and you have to make sure they're not generic. For example, if your character suddenly has superpowers for no reason at all, seemingly, you have to explain the reason. I'm sorry. We are not in the age of Superman anymore, where you could just be like, he's an alien! I'm sorry, our readers want more from you. Our readers are demanding more. I'm sorry if that bothers
Did
you.
you know that is actually one of the reasons why Stanley created X-Men and...
Because it gave a reason. It gave a rhyme and reason to it. That makes perfect sense,
Yeah,
actually.
He actually created them because he's like I created all these superheroes. I got these superheroes I want to create. I just don't know how to explain the powers. You know what the meaning is, whatever.
There you go. See, but at least with the mutants, it had a scientific explanation that actually made sense. You know, you could line it up, and with the world, you need to world build around it. And even if you world build with fantasy stuff or science fiction stuff and go, there you go, it at least makes sense.
Like what I do is that some of my characters just like randomly have superpowers.
Yeah.
But the idea is that the abilities kind of pass down through generations.
Yeah, it's
from-
genetic, kind of like with Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you haven't
Yeah.
seen it, please go see it. Moving right along though, with Avatar: The Last
Yeah,
Airbender,
I'll hunt you down.
it's genetic, right? You're generally passing it down as a trait through genetics, and that can be a really great one. Or you can have like, if you're doing the whole classic radioactive thingamabob, I will just say caveat there: make sure that you're actually doing something radioactive and not something that you think is radioactive, but that's not how radioactivity works. Make sure you look into it at least a little. And then on top of that, make sure that if you have them get powers randomly despite being super, super far away from the power plant, explain why no one else got powers but them. For example,
Because it was a radioactive spider.
DC's The Flash, or Radioactive Spider from Spider-Man. That makes more sense, right? It's not radioactive blast, everyone gets powers. It's radioactive blast, I was electrocuted. Therefore, I now have electric-based speed powers. Or it's, they have a couple of the other villains in the show where it's like, oh, I fell into a vat of acid at the same time, so now I'm Acid Man. I don't know if that's actually one, I can't remember. It's been a long time since I watched it. That's fair. They do other things like that, or like this particular girl, she has been unlucky her whole life, and then one lucky thing happens to her right when this strike happens. So as a result, she becomes lucky forever. And as a result, everything around her is bad luck for everyone else, but good luck for her. Which is interesting. It's an interesting concept. But it makes sense then why she has a superpower and everyone else who is just asleep in their bed doesn't. You know? It helps give credence to that. And you also have to have it be consistent with avoiding cliches. Make sure it's consistent in your world building. Make sure you don't go, oh, hey, by the way, this person's superpowers are genetic, but everyone else doesn't have genetic superpowers. Why? Why? Why?
And then it's like, oh,
So
yeah,
many
because
whys.
I want to.
Exactly.
Like,
Just
you need to
you
love
can't
it.
have it be just because you want to. I know you want to as a writer. Just be like, but it's easy. Sorry, no.
Sucks to suck.
If you are a writer, you cannot take the easy way out. Sorry, that is how you fail. Boom. You have to take the hard way, unfortunately, as a writer. You have to push through and make sure that your world is well fleshed out. Now, that being said, we're going to have a lesson probably next week talking about world building, but not world building so much that you absolutely explode and never write your story. There's a fine line between world building so much that you never get to writing and not world building at all. So you're just like, oh, they have superpowers and I have no idea why, but I'm not gonna bother to explain that. Villain! It's like, no.
It's like you publish a book about like your world building.
About world building. There you go. I think that's the only way you can get away with that. But with this idea of avoiding cliches and avoiding tropes, make sure that with the characters too, you avoid individual character tropes. If you're trying to make your character relatable, make sure that it's relatable for a reason. For example, Hermione, she is mocked, right? Harry and Ron don't really like her. Why though? Because she's a smart aleck and makes them feel dumb.
And she's a nerd.
And she's a nerd. And so as a result, they're making fun of her, right? Still not okay, but as a result, it makes sense. It has a reason. If they just had them making fun of her for absolutely no reason,
What the frick,
That's
man?
why? Why are you making fun of this poor girl? You have no reason. And on top of that, your readers are going to be upset because they're going to be like, also why? And on top of that, you can't just say, oh yeah, by the way, this is happening in the background, but then never show it. For example, if I don't know, you want to have the character have trauma in the background, and then say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm traumatized, and then never talk about it, you can't do that. Or say, oh yeah, by the way, I have anxiety, but then your character is for some reason never anxious the rest of the book. You're like, pardon?
It's like, you sure that you had anxiety? and it
You
never
sure?
showed?
You're sure you're not just thinking you have anxiety and you're just fine? But then on top of that, you also don't want to make it too much of the only point of the story, right?
It's like,
I have anxiety
I'm scared
the
of
whole
everything.
time. I'm scared of everything. And I mean, that's okay. Sure. Like with the with the show Chuck, right?
Yeah.
That was fantastic because he was anxious about everything because he never left his house. See, but there's a reason for it. It's because he never left his house. You can't just have them be permanently anxious all the time as a freaking warrior who has fought in battles before. You're like, why are you anxious? You've
Why are
already
you
done
scared?
this. Like, it only makes sense if they're fighting something that they've never seen before, right? Or that they don't understand. If they're fighting
Or it's,
aliens,
PTSD.
then sure. Or PTSD, exactly.
Or
With the
the-
PTSD, that is very important that you don't overdo that, but you don't underdo that either. Because you don't want to do it, like I said, where you say, I have PTSD, and then never acknowledge it. But you also don't want to make sure that it takes over the entire book to the point where it's just one big PTSD flashback. You know? It's important to have balance. Yes, do you have a question?
I was just like, I know a good way where it could be like, you know, they've like fought battles before and they're still alive. But like the last battle they fought, half of the people that he was supposed to be protecting died.
No, that's fair. That would make you anxious. If, like, half your platoon dies after you're supposed to be protecting them, dude, you messed up. It's understandable to be anxious then, right? But if you're just, like, doing the same thing you've always done, why explain it? Give me a reason, you know? You need to make sure that you're not trying so hard to make your characters or villains relatable that you give them unrealistic things. For example, with villains, a lot of people like to do the relatable villain, right? Good old Loki and people like that. You know, yeah, we love the relatable villains, right? It's
My
great.
God, I love
But at
Loki.
the same time, with these relatable villains, you need to make sure that it has a reason. For example, with Loki, it makes total sense that he is the way he is. Trauma, background, birthright, all the issues.
I mean, his brother's a freaking superhero. and
His
turns
brother's
out-
a superhero
His daddy
and always
did
got
his
anything he
dad.
wanted. Like, there were issues, clearly. You know, there's a point to it. He's not just like, oh, by the way, I want to destroy the world now, despite the fact that I grew up with perfectly perfect parents in a perfectly perfect neighborhood with perfectly perfect everything.
Yeah, makes
It's like,
That is definitely a sum
Why?
of the main villain in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish.
I haven't seen it, but anyway.
You've got to watch it.
But the
It's
point is,
beautiful.
I think the only reason that is okay is if it is someone like a psycho or something like that. Because there are people like that where for some reason they snap, and still to this day no one knows why. But the thing is, if you're doing a villain like that, you have to make sure that they have equally proportionate other villains that are more normal. Because of the fact that that is not the normal. If we lived in a universe where serial killers were normal, we'd be in trouble. But they're only like 1 in a million.
Yeah, no, we would have like
We don't have a big issue as a result because they're only about 1 in a million, and sometimes even then they might be 1 in a million, but they're caught before when they start showing warning signs or things like that when they're growing up, right? Generally, it's pretty obvious, and we can catch that early. But then again, sometimes they blend perfectly into society, and that's when you get concerned. And another thing, if you don't want to do relatable villain, that is okay. But make sure that if you make them powerful, you don't make them so powerful that
if they snap and someone can die.
yeah, or even then, or even then, make sure that you don't build them up to be so powerful. Like for example, Sauron in Lord of the Rings or something like that. If Sauron was this big, evil, huge source of evil, right, like he is, and then Frodo just was like, "I wish you were gone," and he just poofed. What? Excuse me?
Yeah, you just give them a special glare and then they die. They just, like,
Exactly.
I mean, yes,
No.
plot armor is a
No.
thing, but you can't exaggerate it that much.
Exactly. There needs
Actually,
to
you
be a
could.
rhyme and a reason.
Those
you need
are
to make sure.
children's stories.
That's fair. Children's stories.
You
This
could,
is
but
why,
I would
once
whack
again,
you.
9 and below, none of this applies. If you're writing a children's books, you feel free to email me down below and ask more questions about children's books. But this is specifically middle grade, so like 10 all the way through YA. So, as a result of that, most people who are 10 and up generally don't like when the villain's just like, "Pachoo!" at the last minute. And you're like, "Ebede." Or even then, when the hero is, struggling with their superpowers the whole time, just like, "Pachoo, pachoo, 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 I'm a failure." Then all of a sudden they're like, "We need to fight this villain." Phew! I am perfect! And you're like,
excuse me?
this is when the try-fail cycle goes wrong. You need to make sure you have the try-fail cycle, but that they're slowly going upward rather than just meandering in darkness.
And instead of like being imperfect, and then like you were fighting the bad guy.
Main bad guy, and you just kick his butt.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
Oh,
no.
unless there's like a reason, like you see
Yeah,
your best
unless
friend
there's a
die,
reason.
and then you're just like angry.
Well, and
Or
then,
even then,
and then
I would say
an
careful
angry
with the
villain.
anger thing because that can be incorrect too. Only because I've seen people do that, unfortunately, where they're like, "Oh, I'm mad because they killed so and so. Now I'm perfect." You still wouldn't be perfect.
Well, yeah.
You'd just be angry, which would improve, yes, but it would also cause problems too because
Yeah.
anger, you're not fully in control of yourself, right? And you ultimately could end up like causing harm to the other side. You're a loose cannon if you're angry. Sure, it brings some power, it brings some grit, right? It makes you stand your ground. But you need to be careful too. The only reason I say that is because I've run into that a couple times.
Yeah, so what you could do though
But-
is like have this friend who's like super good at magic, right? And then he dies. And you also have like this a great potential, but you're like don't want to mess it up, so you let them do it. But then when they die,
Right.
they're like, shoot, I gotta man up.
And so
like,
you
they're
learn
training
more,
from
you-
your childhood.
yes.
That kind of comes like, like riding a bike. And so then you're like getting back to the swing and then, yeah.
Right, kind of like with the Winter Soldier Captain America thing that they did. With Falcon and the Winter Soldier. With Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the reason that worked is because he was already a war hero, right? He'd already like fought a lot and he was already the Falcon, right? But he started training with Captain America's shield, right? Because he'd never used it before. And that's, I think, very similar to what you're saying, where it's like, okay, I gotta get my butt in gear and start actually learning how to do this better. But that's different than immediately going and killing the bad guy, right? You need to still have that build up. That is another way to add meat to your story.
You gotta have
building
reason,
things
you gotta have
up.
process.
You gotta have a process.
It's
You
like-
gotta make
it's
them
like-
human. Even if they're an alien, they gotta be human.
It's interesting.
They gotta be
like, I mean,
relatable.
like, oh, I don't like you should die.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know that's it.
And even if you have them slowly built up throughout the story, you still need to have the bad guy fight be proportionate. Why? Because that's what the readers came to see, right? They waited. I'm sorry, I'm gonna call out spoilers. Just skip like the next 10 seconds for Michael Bay spoilers. He waits 7 books for him to defeat Hatch, right?
Okay.
And then in the last book, he goes, "Achoo!" and he's dead. And I'm like, I wanted a big fight, man. I wanted pulls and punches. I wanted this to go, man. You know, I've been waiting this whole time for Hatch to freaking be blown up and like some massive heist something or something to, you know, a plan. And ultimately a big battle, you know, this big final battle. And instead, all I got was finger guns. You did. I'm like, a little bit disappointed. All right, end of my rant. But the point is,
This is why fight directors are just yes.
yes, because you need to make sure that you're directing the fight properly. And like I said, this goes back into world building. Don't go crazy.
Oh,
But at the same time, don't make it too skimpy either. Don't be like, oh yeah, by the way, we've been waiting for this the whole book, and it takes 1 chapter to resolve. Or less.
No, I'm
That's
sorry.
problematic. It's like,
What are you gonna do with the rest of the book then?
exactly, what was the point of reading the rest of the
Right.
series? I could have read this book and been like, yay! All by itself.
In Mistborn, the first book is one book, but they're leading up to like the final confrontation.
Exactly,
for it.
they're leading
and
up
it
to
still
stuff.
takes like 3 or 4 chapters, and
Yes.
they're Brandon Sanderson chapters, so they're gonna be lengthy.
So they're going to be long. And that's appropriate to its length, right? Once again, it's appropriate to its length. And that is the one issue. If you have a shorter story, you have to make it also appropriate to its length, but also don't make sure that you just completely like, poof, it's done. That's problematic too.
Death
So,
3D.
death in
Is a
3D.
thing.
Yay! All right. Last
Okay.
point.
Opening Suckers 101. Wait, one second.
Okay. So,
No, I forgot about the secret. You go like this.
So,
you didn't move it to the
the next
side,
part
right?
with adding meat to the
And
story.
you have a gosh darn sucker.
When it was bending.
This is
right?
explaining
That you
things
just
rather
mad
than
up.
just listing them. So make sure that you're explaining things rather than just listing random facts in passing. So, for instance, this kind of relates back to the show don't tell principle that I talked about in the beginning. Why? Because of the fact that instead of saying she is blonde, she has green eyes, she has black hair, she is African American, you know, these are all facts. You're listing it like a textbook, you know. She is
No, please, no.
Exactly. You don't want to read she is African American, she is 6'5", she also kicks butt with bad guys with superpowers. By the way, she kicked this guy in the face.
That's not
Been
ultra.
to school for 6 hours.
Exactly. I'm like, I've already gone to school for 6 hours, or if you've graduated from college, you're like, no more textbooks, no, run. Or at least that's how I kind of feel sometimes. Anyway, but you feel like, no more textbook. And you don't want to make your readers feel like that.
No trucks across the river. And you slowly back
Yes.
up.
No, ban
Ouch,
that.
that's a fun story idea. No one steal that. It is copyrighted.
Yeah. See, and I don't believe in book banning. I just believe in book editing. There are some things where it's like, okay, let's fix this, please. It's a little rough. I think every book has its purpose and every book has meaning. Even if it sounds crazy or you don't like it, that's okay, because that story might have perfect meaning and value to someone else. Personally, that's what I believe. However, it's important that you make your story readable. And then you don't want people to be like, you know, I wasn't into book banning, but your book, so boring, it made me want to. You know, you don't want them to react like that. It's like, no, let's not change their minds.
You're not going to publish this. Get a plot.
Get a plot. Yes, that's true too. You need to make sure you have a plot or a character arc. I say or a character arc because most romances aren't a statistical plot. Or, I mean, they are, but they're a plot with character points rather than like defeating bad guy at the top. It's them finally falling in love, which tends to be a character thing. But the point is, you need to either have a character arc or a plot. You can't just be like, and random stuff happens. Yay.
I don't want to read that.
Exactly. No one wants to read
A
this.
kindergartner would.
Again, chucking it across the room, hissing as I back up.
Exactly. The only person who wants to read that is a
Or you
poor
know, the
child. Is a
multiverse.
child who's first learning how to read, and it's like Sam has a ball. Ball is red. You're like, you go, kid. But that's the only time that is acceptable.
And
in
then when
writing.
you're an adult, you read that, you throw it out of the multiverse.
Exactly. You're just like, no, I'm done. I've already learned to get beyond that. You know.
Just like you say to your dog, here, want this? Go fetch.
Exactly.
And never come back.
So if the main character, for example, the key is the key to the magic working, like they are the whole purpose, you know, they are the heir to the throne and magic will be restored to the land. You need to make sure you explain why. You can't just say, you random child, you will now restore magic to the universe.
Yay!
Boom! Why? Awesome, but also why? Explain. Is he the heir to some dark prince? Is he the dragon lord? Like, explain
Yes, I
why.
am.
Not even
Explain
the
why.
GT that was chosen at random by that one dude, like, ha, power. Now go do my job.
Exactly. You're like, okay, what? Pardon? Like, why? You need to make sure that when adding meat to your story, you ask, why them? Why them? You know, and it could even just be an accident, like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. That poor guy was in the wrong place at the wrong time, man. He was in the bank, just wanted to start a bakery, man.
Yeah.
That was
Miss
it.
Thorne, they met because she was trying to scam the dude.
Exactly. They met because she was trying to freaking scam him, right? And this is something where it can be an accident, but it's still, if it's an accident, you need to explain it. Or if it's on purpose, you need to explain it. Like I said, is the person who's the key to the magic secretly the dragon prince? Awesome. Explain. You know, make sure it makes sense.
To their dragon form.
Also, exactly. How have they not turned into the dragon form yet? How did Dragon Dad and Mama Human have a child? So many questions. Yes.
With Fablehaven, like, he forgets a lot of stuff. Like, he builds it up to, like, for the entire second book after he takes the Revan thing off. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't go invisible for the first half of the third book in darkness, but at the last half, when he learns that he can do it, he turns invisible, and then after that, like, it's just totally forgotten.
See, it's funny because things like that do happen, and typically with that, it's either forgetting world building, which should have been an editor thing. No, not. Don't get mad at me. I believe Lisa Mangum is the person who edited that. Don't get mad at me, but. You are right. I do think that was forgotten. And if it wasn't forgotten, it was deliberately forgotten, in which case it is called retconning. And that is a whole nother can of worms for an entirely different lesson here. I'm going to write this on the side of the board. I'm probably going to spell it wrong, but that's just because I'm rushing. But that is a whole nother can of worms called retconning. I'm glad you pointed that out because it is absolutely a thing, and you can utilize it for good or for evil. So you need to make sure that you're aware of those kinds of things. Thank you for pointing that out. But with that, make sure that everything has a rhyme and a reason. And with fleshing and making more meat to your stories, make sure it's not too underdone, but not too overdone. You want to make sure your story isn't so bloated it can barely move. It is a giant whale on the couch and it can't move. That's a problem. That's too much. But you also don't want to make sure that it's not so skinny and weak that it's going to die of starvation in 2 days. You're like, problem. So with that, I'm going to open the floor up to questions for roughly the next 5 minutes because technically it's already been an hour. if you guys have any questions. If not, I'll just turn it off. I know, right? That's what I know. So with that, do you guys have any questions about adding meat to your story? And keep in mind, this is being recorded, so I'm going to probably repeat your question just to make sure the audio catches it. Yes, Michael.
Wait, this is being.
Oh, if you forget something for like a couple of books,
Mm-hmm.
then is there a way that you could like add it into another book?
You said forgetting something. Like,
Yeah, like-
do you mean like a very important detail, or do you mean like a
Yeah.
minor thing?
Like if someone has magical powers, but like you forget that they have magical powers for a couple of books.
I would say that's something typically your editor will catch. This is why it's so important as a self-published author, if you choose to self-publish, to get an editor, because they will help catch things like that. And if they don't, get a new editor. Make sure you get a new editor if they don't catch stuff like that. Yeah, you could get multiple editors. The only issue with that is they tend to be really expensive. But I definitely agree with you. This is why beta readers are important, because beta readers. And make sure your beta readers are harsh and not family. And when I say harsh, I mean just like they're willing to tell you stuff. They're not just like, it's great.
Yeah, brutal honest.
That's not helpful.
I need someone who'll be brutally honest, because Meredith, I love you, but I need criticism.
I need criticism, right?
Same.
So, yes.
I'm trying to write a fan fiction, but I don't know where
Fan
to
fiction?
publish
Great.
it
Oh,
and what story to do it from.
so with fan fiction, I would typically recommend Wattpad, just because that's one where a lot of fan fiction authors start out. There are other ones you can upgrade to later, like Archive of Our Own. I know there are a few others, but it would take me a minute to think of it. I think there's a new one called Inkit. Spelled like this. However, I would recommend Wattpad, but that's purely just because of the fact that with Wattpad, this is typically where starting authors are, whereas this is for, you're going to get a lot more criticism from Inkit or places like Archive of Our Own, because of the fact that that's typically for people who have been writing for a long, long time and are doing their own fan fiction. So as a result, it's a little bit higher grade. But absolutely, Wattpad is a great place to start, and beyond having it being a great place to start, I am more than happy to help edit for you, as I've mentioned in the past, which can definitely help you stand out there too. Any other questions about adding meat to your story? Did I answer your question fully?
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
You sure? Is there something I missed?
I can't figure out a story or a series to start with
Do you mean for the fan fiction or just in
for
general?
the fan fiction.
For the fan fiction? I would generally say, where did you want the TV show to go? You can always rewrite the TV show. Like, if you're like, you know what, I think they shouldn't have ended up, this is a popular one, but I think they shouldn't have ended up with so-and-so. I think that is the wrong love interest for them. I want them to end up with so-and-so. You can do that. Or if you say, hey, guess what, I didn't like that so-and-so died in the end. What if they lived? How would the TV show be different? Basically, just think about those kinds of things.
Or what if someone else dies instead of them?
Yeah, or what if another character dies instead of them? How would that make it different? Or what if instead of all these people being fantasy characters, like rewriting Harry Potter, but they all meet in a regular school instead of Hogwarts? How would that be different? And they use guns. Like, that would be weird. Great, but weird. And so, like, you just gotta think of, take the basic idea and then say, what if? I gotta say, with fan fiction, the biggest thing is, what if? Just ask yourself, what if they did this? What if they did that? For some reason, I can't. How to F? All right. There we go. For some reason, I was struggling. I was like, which direction? I think it's because I keep looking down at the recording, and I keep seeing it backwards because it's mirror image. And now, as a result, I can't write the letter F. So I apologize. Moving right along, do you guys have any other questions that you're hoping to have me answer in the next 2 minutes about adding meat to your story, or any other questions about writing?
Well, I'm out to you, Wade.
Yes, Life, the Universe, and everything.
Heck
Go
yeah.
check it out. I highly recommend it if you live in Utah. If you don't live in Utah, I'm sorry. Moving on.
There was someone who said like authors like torturing their readers.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of tempted to end my story like my world was once again black, like he's passing out, right?
Yeah.
And just end the book there.
That's fair. That's fair. I would say that's absolutely a valid way to end the book, but you need to make sure you appropriately foreshadow it. And I say appropriately because if you overdo it and you, like I said, you spoon feed your reader, then they're going to be like, I see this coming. But if you don't spoon feed them enough, then when it happens, they're just pissed off. They're just mad. They're like, why? What? Come on. You know? So you got, the only thing I'd say with that, brilliant idea, just make sure you appropriately foreshadow. So that way they're not frustrated or that you don't over foreshadow. So there's a fine line to walk there, but the nice thing about foreshadowing is you can always add it in later. So if you under foreshadow, you can fix it later. Any other questions? Only questions right now because we can do comments after. Just because we have 1 minute left. Yes, question.
Okay. Like, if I wrote my own series, then would it be possible for me to write my own fan fiction?
Theoretically, yes. My friend Jade and I have actually possibly discussed that. I don't know if we're actually going to do that, but we have discussed possibly doing that. Theoretically, you can write your own fan fiction, but I'd recommend doing it under a pseudonym or anonymous, so that way no one knows it's you. It'd be funny. Yes, Eli.
I have to go.
Okay.
You know?
Well, that's okay because we are turning it off anyway. Thank you guys for coming. Bye.